This happened a long time ago, in the late 1990s. When I was 19, I moved from Oregon to Florida to be with my boyfriend at the time. Don't ever do that. I was thinking white sand beaches and Mickey Mouse, but instead I got the swamp, bugs, and dirt roads. It was a huge shock to the system. We lived in a small town called Hawthorne, just outside of Gainesville. Don't ever go there. It was very small, had one stoplight and 4 stores, which were Dollar General, Steve's Market, Eckerd's Pharmacy, and Sonny's Barbecue. I got a job at the now defunct Eckerd's, in the middle of the town. It was right next to the grocery store, so everybody shopped there. After about 3 months or so of working there, I walked in to start my shift one day, when the manager pulled me into his office. Laid out on his desk was about 30 to 40 opened letters, all addressed by hand. To me. Would you happen to know who's writing you all these letters? No, I have no idea. Here, read one. I picked a cheerful-looking yellow one. Inside were 2 handwritten letters, and a magazine cutout of a woman with blonde hair, just like me. My manager watched on as I read the letter. I skipped around a lot out of confusion, desperately trying to find out why I'm in this room. From what I read, it was mostly someone imagining what spending time with me would be like. A lot of it was of a sexual nature. There were descriptions and comments about my hair, about washing it, smelling it, and something about moonlight. A few sentences were highlighted, while others were underlined. My first thought was, am I getting fired? My manager then asked, do you know this David Elrod? Yeah, I think so. He's a regular who comes in a couple times a week to pick up Diet Coke and medication for his mom. David was in his late 20s, tall, lanky guy with thick glasses and frizzy blonde hair, and was obviously very socially awkward and possibly mentally challenged. On rare occasions, he would make small talk as I rang up his soda. Once or twice, he would linger at my cash register or stare at me. But I figured he was trying to adjust his eyes, or had poor social skills, harmless compared to some other people I've met in Florida, so I didn't pay him any mind. That was until that day in my manager's office. I knew that he was the one writing the letters because of a strange encounter I had with him about 2 weeks prior. While working, he came up behind me and caressed my hair. I had to remove it from his hands, and he apologized. It was weird, but no harm done. I went right back to work. After telling my manager this, he informed me that the customer was going to be banned from the store, and I was going to be sent home while they worked out the details. Confused, I walked out of the store and drove home. It was a strange day, to say the least. 2 hours after I got back home from my non-shift at work, there was a knock at my door. I look out the window and see what resembles a SWAT team. What the fuck? I saw men in tactical gear, brandishing large weapons. There were 2 men dressed in suits, and several uniformed cops. In what seemed like slow motion at the time, I opened the door. An officer held up a few oddly familiar letters. Excuse me, can we come in and talk to you about these? Realizing everyone in town has read the letters, I was so embarrassed that I just wanted to pass the fuck out. I didn't even know the guy. We sat on my couch and the officer begins to speak. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my boyfriend shooting me dirty looks from the bedroom. The officer mentioned that they got the letters from the pharmacy and were attempting to issue a trespassing notice against David. The officers confronted him at his residence. Apparently, he was not happy about this. He insisted for over 45 minutes how this was all a big mistake and that I wanted to talk to him. He was very combative and persistent, so they decided to pursue stalking charges. But it turns out the story gets even more strange. and horrifying. The officer continued, "You need to be aware of something. David killed and partially dismembered his mother when he was 12 years old. He was released from a juvenile psychiatric facility less than 4 years ago. We found very disturbing materials at his house. We believe that he's been stalking you for quite some time." His mom has been dead for years, and he's still coming to my store and picking up her medication and Diet Coke? I remember that he would often say, "It's my mom's favorite drink." David was arrested the next day for stalking after he was found in the Eckert's parking lot. The last thing I ever heard about him was that he was readmitted to the psychiatric hospital, at least temporarily. I didn't have a chance to read all the letters in full before they were entered into some vault of evidence, nor do they explain what they found at the house. So I never had the full scale of what was happening. My boyfriend at the time was a huge dick about the whole thing, so I moved back to Oregon a week later. Besides, he wants to hang around when Norman Bates is fixated on you. So a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money, between his retirement pension and my mom making what she did as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and with it being a small town, the owners didn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This took place in the year 1990. I remember the date well, because it was shortly after my 15th birthday, and I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work, just to get some experience on the road, both day and night. I was sitting at my usual spot at the table that was set up along the windows. I was reading a book, with my feet propped up and a Mountain Dew on the table alongside some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evenings that way, reading books, getting up to run the register, or stocking the coolers at different times. I remember glancing up because something had caught my attention that was unusual. I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75. This in itself was very strange. Because of where we were located, you didn't get many people walking there, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured that she had broken down somewhere and was coming in to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. But I was completely wrong. She came into the store and looked around for a few minutes. I remember getting this strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the town just north of us. She was referring to Ocala. My dad lets her know that he's working right now and there's no way that he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she's looking away from my dad, he catches my eye and subtly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but she then turns back to my dad and points at me, asking me if I can take her. My dad cut in and said I only had a learner's permit and that I wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere. Normally, I would have done it, even though it's illegal, because I had done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad, since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. It turns out he had a bad vibe the moment he had seen her walking up the drive. She cursed him out for a minute, and then he basically told her to get out of the store. She opened up the door and stormed out. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it shut. She then walked out of the store, down the driveway, and I continued to watch as she made her way back up to the interstate, and then up the northbound ramp. Almost a year later, I'm in my bedroom. It was less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room. "Son, get your ass in here and look at this." I quickly run to the living room, and I see my dad pointing at the TV, and I look at the mugshot of the lady that was on screen. I immediately remembered the lady who had been in the store. It turns out I almost gave a ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer, and then later was put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened if I had given her a ride. I am a proud Floridian. At the time of this story, early 2000s, I was going to college in South Florida, and I lived with my family in my hometown located in the Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through Central Florida to get between my school and my house, so I mostly went home just for the holidays. It was the Thanksgiving of my junior year, and I was excited that I had been able to rearrange my midterms to be able to leave campus 3 days ahead of everyone else. I was expecting to beat the masses of traffic, and I was hoping for a quick trip back home. My roommates wanted to have one last meal together before we all left for break. So we all met up at the campus dining hall around 4 p.m., and I set off on my journey around 5:30. Around 10 p.m., I was just a bit more than halfway there. I always stopped at this mom and pop kind of diner by the side of the highway to grab some food, use the restroom, and called my dad to let him know that I was okay. I didn't have a cell phone back then. Well, I hadn't been through here since summer, and unfortunately the place went out of business. So, a bit bummed out that I wasn't going to be able to get my chocolate chip pancakes, I just kept going. There really wasn't much build up around there at the time, so when I saw signs for a rest stop in, of all places on God's green earth, some bumfuck town called Alachua, I went and parked directly under the streetlight for safety and used the facilities, called my dad on the payphone, etc. I didn't see anyone else there, except for a very exhausted looking woman, who asked me for directions, saying that she was with her husband and 2 small children, and they had made a wrong turn trying to get to Disney. Alachua is about 150 miles from Disney World. So I left the rest area and was walking back to my car when I noticed a beat-up, unmarked bluish-gray work van parked very close to the driver's side door of my '95 Honda Civic. I thought, yeah, okay, that's pretty weird. Of course, it had Florida tags on it. So it couldn't have been the lady I talked to before. I distinctly remember she said she was from Virginia. I turned around and hightailed it back to the rest stop, promptly running into some random middle-aged guy who had 2 little boys with him. It turns out that it was his wife that I had spoken to before. She emerged from the bathroom a second later. I told him what was going on with the van and how I didn't know what to do. He said that he would go and check it out. So he left the kids with his wife, then walked up to the driver's side door of the van. He stood there for a moment before speaking. His voice awkwardly quivered, but I could hear him yelling from where we were standing, about 100 feet away.
Excuse me, gentlemen. We've already called the police, so I'm going to have to politely suggest that you get out of here."
He then ran back to us, grabbed his wife and kids, and pointed to me with a swift,
"You, come on, let's get in the car, now."
And we all ran back to his car together. Very confused, sitting in the back seat of a stranger's SUV, while he went and used the payphone, presumably to call the police. Meanwhile, the van pulled out of there. I had never seen someone get the fuck out of there quite like they got the fuck out of there. They ran up onto the curb on their way out. They burned rubber. It was almost comical. The cops got there and I found out what happened. The man went to go check out the van, and he could see inside pretty well, because I had parked under the streetlight. The first thing he noticed was that all the seats except for the driver's seat had been removed. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat, and another guy hiding in the back, with a tarp laid out, and a bunch of other random items back there that I couldn't immediately identify. Neither of the men were reading a newspaper or a map. They were both apparently just sitting there, waiting. Still makes me sick just thinking about it.
There's always a reason to be afraid.